Hi everyone, I recently finished Into the Wood Chipper, a whistleblower's account of how the Trump administration shredded USAID by Nicholas Inrich, a former high-ranking USAID civil servant who served under 4 different administrations. I completed this about a week ago, but needed some extra time to properly digest it. The book was fascinating, but also highly stressful and politically charged. Even though most federal staff at least claim to operate apolitically, there is no doubt that the author holds very strong feelings for the current administration and its now defunct Department of Government Efficiency. Before seeing news reports of literal tons of food being left to rot in warehouses and a huge imminent death toll warning from the sudden halt of assistance by the federal government, I wasn't very familiar with the USAID organization. Before, I often heard of the simple term foreign aid, which tended to act as a somewhat vague point of contention between the two major political parties. USAID was started during the Kennedy administration in the early 60s as an important part of the Cold War. Whether motivated by pure good intentions or not, it's better that we helped out and commanded influence over developing countries than the Soviets. As the decades passed, USAID remained critical in containing and treating diseases such as tuberculosis and Ebola, which could become a national security risk to America itself, as when nurse Nina Pham caught Ebola in Texas from an international traveler. Despite USAID's important presence in global health, there was indeed much credible evidence of general corruption and waste. From a purely libertarian perspective, one could argue that the organization was just a vestige of the Cold War, and in today's age of globalization, countries are far better equipped to provide for themselves. But even then, the way Doge and various Trump political appointees went about haphazardly dismantling the organization without much needed caution and long-term planning was not only horrifying, but stupid in a comparable way to the bureaucratic blunders I've read about under Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's China. Many of the events and errors I read about were so unbelievable that I had to seek corroboration by sources generally considered politically neutral and trustworthy. Besides cutting off the delivery of food and personal protective equipment which countries were depending on, even the shipment of antibiotics for tuberculosis patients receiving treatment was suddenly halted. One would hope it's common knowledge that stopping an antibiotic treatment before the bacteria are entirely killed off is the equivalent of Goku giving one of his arch-enemies a senzu bean. By mid-2025, USAID was entirely dismantled, although some of its operations have been absorbed into the US State Department. This was a very broad and brief summary of what's detailed in the book, and I'd highly encourage you to check it out for yourself if you're interested. If you'd like to stick around for a little bit more, here are 3 excerpts that I found particularly noteworthy. From page 31, here's what even the famous Project 2025 had to say about USAID. USAID helps communities to lead their own development journeys by reducing the impact of conflict, preventing hunger and the spread of pandemic disease, and counteracting the drivers of violence, instability, transnational crime, and other threats. In alignment with U.S. national security interests, the agency promotes American prosperity through initiatives that expand markets for U.S. exports, encourage innovation, create a level playing field for U.S. businesses, and support more stable, resilient, and democratic societies that are less likely to act against American interests and more likely to respect family, life, and religious liberty. Pages 46 and 61 go into executive orders. On 46, President Trump had signed 26 executive orders on his first day in office. EO 14169 was titled Reevaluating and Realigning United States Foreign Aid. It directed federal agencies for 90 days to immediately pause the distribution of foreign aid to countries, NGOs, and others pending reviews of such programs for programmatic efficiency and consistency with United States foreign policy. And then on page 61, 8 days after Trump's order freezing all foreign assistance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a memo titled Emergency Humanitarian Waiver to Foreign Assistance Pause. The waiver specified that implementers of life-saving humanitarian assistance programs should continue or resume work if they have stopped. It went on to define what life-saving meant: core life-saving medicine, medical services, food, shelter, and subsistence assistance, as well as supplies and reasonable administrative costs as necessary to deliver such assistance. But as you'll read soon on in the book, that was quickly sabotaged. And finally, on page 101 and 102, we have a meeting between the author Nicholas Enric and several Trump political employees, where he describes the work that USAID actually does throughout the world after it was effectively sabotaged. I began to describe various life-saving components of USAID's global health portfolio, highlighting how we prepare for and respond to emerging pandemic threats, support the diagnosis and treatment of tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV, and immunize millions of children from the deadliest childhood diseases. I spoke for about 5 minutes, focusing primarily on our infectious diseases work, and hoping to keep the attention of people who seem to have no experience or interest in global health. When I finished, the room was silent, the political appointees looking at one another in what appeared to be disbelief. The silence was broken by Ken Jackson, who chuckled softly and shook his head. "Wow, there really is so much that USAID does that we never knew," he said. "This is the story that needs to get out there." All right, I hope you enjoyed my look at the book Into the Wood Chipper. Definitely check it out, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye.